So thank you so much for being here. I'm Meaghan D. I'm the co-chair of the Design Educators community. We also have Meaghan, who is the other co-chair here today as well, and several of our board members. So thank you all for being here today. Jessica Jacobs and I have been working on a book on student-run design firms, and we are wanting to hear from people about their experiences, questions they had as well. And we've got a lovely panel of speakers today: Alison, Popp, Jeff Joyner, and Gaby Hernández. And so what I will kick this off is a brief presentation from Jessica and I about our experiences running and researching student-run design firms. So Jessica and I met several years ago at a conference, an AIGA conference, of course, and we were talking about our shared interest in firms. So she's conducted several surveys and interviews over the years, and I had spent 3 years running a studio at Virginia Tech and later helped train Jeff, who's now running that studio there. So over our short presentation, we'll talk a little bit about the why do we create and operate student-run faculty advised studios? What are the common structures of these? Who are the clients and how does that connect to community engagement goals at an institution? And then the main part of this is going to be some examples followed by a discussion and a Q&A. And so please feel free to share any questions that you might have. So to kick us off, Jessica's going to talk about the why.
Why indeed. Thanks, Meaghan. So part of what I was interested in like many of you who are maybe here because you haven't yet started one of these or you're at the beginning stages, I was interested in getting something more formalized at Columbia College Chicago, where I teach, and so applied for the AIGA faculty research grant to learn more about it. And as part of that, I conducted surveys. This was about a little over 2 years ago, and then site visits with several firms, including Alison, Popp here. I interviewed Maria Rogal at Mint Design Studio, where Gaby is as well, and also talked in depth with Meaghan, and I worked on this together. And so what we're going to talk about are some of the results from that survey and research. And one of the main things is that we're talking about this across a spectrum, that most of us in design, and specifically in graphic design, really believe in this practicum like learning by doing experience, where we have a real client and students are doing something that mimics a studio experience, and it is in some ways to varying levels of degree, where it might be one client project in one class all the way up to these faculty advised design studios. So we're really kind of looking at that end of the spectrum, but realizing that a lot of these ideas run across that. And so what we're just going to show here is just a few of the quotes that I thought were really helpful from the survey that can get us talking, because we want to mostly have this be a conversation. And so related to the learning outcomes, one respondent to the survey said, having our student studio has been a great learning tool. The key is having the right advisor leadership, administration that supports you, and students that want this type of experience. So one of the questions we asked was, what advice do you have for other faculty who are interested in this? And one of the questions that came about for me in the research, as I saw people operate these studios and talk to people on the phone, et cetera, was the differences in how people saw the faculty role in this. And so I would describe it as a range from, are you an advisor? Are you more of an instructor? Are you teaching? Is it more hands-on? And then sometimes it kind of went more in an art direction, like you were more of an art director. And so I wanted to bring that up for conversation later, this sort of distinction as to how people saw that role. And then this is another quote, trust your students. So if they know you believe in them and give them complete control, they'll shoulder that responsibility, which raises the question of how much freedom we do give to students. So some faculty advisors had talked about, what happens when things go wrong? What happens when a project goes off the rails? How much responsibility do we give to people? And then do we vet the students ahead of time? If it's a requirement, how do we establish the quality and maintain that throughout? So that, how much freedom, and then what I think is that you, back to you,
Yep,
Meaghan?
that's back to me. And so Again, just sort of thinking about some common structures and practices behind these things. So again, from those surveys that were conducted, 62% offered these experiences through a course or internship taken for credit. 90% had students that could repeat that if they wanted to for more than one term. And 79% required students to complete a portfolio review or application interview. But I also know a lot of this stuff doesn't fit tidily into boxes. So for instance, when I started at Virginia Tech with For Design, they didn't have a meeting time scheduled. They didn't have a class, so I had to write a class for it. And we also now allow you to either take it for class credit or internship credit. So figuring out how that worked. And at first we didn't have as much interest, and later on we kind of built momentum so then we could get pickier and go through a portfolio and application review process. So what are a lot of the goals of the studio? So the number one answer that Jessica saw from the survey results was that people were looking for experiential learning opportunities. So other things that they might be interested in were building portfolios or engaging with communities, building reputations, and essentially just providing opportunities for the students. Some larger additional observations, we're thinking about things in different structures. So sometimes there's this capstone format. So the client-based practicum could be viewed by faculty as the ultimate capstone-like experience that provides that final component in a curriculum to prepare students for practice. So really getting that hands-on learning. And there's also a broad range of studio types. So at one end, students might take a course that has some client project built into a class, sort of just dipping your toe into the water. And at the other end of the spectrum, there might be a full faculty studio that has taking on real world clients. They might even be operating 40 hours a week. We've even seen places that have freestanding structures, whereas other places struggle to find a place to even hold a client meeting. So with resources and budget, 59% charge client fees. And of that, 52% have a budget of under $5,000. 24% have a budget of $5,000 to $10,000. Of the 3 years that I was running this studio, we earned over those 3 years just under $150,000, but we really were working year round. We had some summer projects built into that and some larger client experiences, and it was not completely from the ground up. So another piece of advice was to establish processes, relationships, and guidelines with the department well in advance. Seek out similar initiatives regarding best practices. And this is going to vary from institution to institution. So if you are new at a school, try to meet someone that knows a bit about that institution. So at Virginia Tech, we run as a center, meaning we have to go through all these hoops like rate reviews and processes like that. But we can also look to other centers and see how they're run. So Vet Med is actually one. So if you are putting a cat or dog up in a studio, or it's not a studio, it's a veterinary clinic, they actually have to charge rates in a similar fashion to what we charge rates to clients. And back to Jessica.
Thanks, Meaghan. And I think another thing that we wanted to talk about is who, in the context of clients, who are the clients that we're working with, but then also who are the advisors. So the first set of stats that we have here, a lot of people in our research and people I've talked to, they talk a lot about workload. So that's one thing that we want to talk about there, how these experiences, how much work is involved and how that's accounted for. And so we did ask people like how much experience they'd had at this, if they had tenure. So you can see like half of them were full-time professors with tenure, which is interesting. Like I need to go back and look at the data. I'm curious. I think very few were part-time. And then the amount of industry experience was quite high as well. And so some other advice, be ready to accept some on campus don't want this to succeed or don't appreciate what design is. Be ready to have the principal or principals vet incoming jobs to weed out bad clients. So there's a lot about what kind of client makes a good client. And then some other things we asked about, obviously people want to know, do you bill? How do you bill? Is it internal, external? So a lot of them, again, this was 2 years ago, it's a little dated now, but was work for internal clients. Half work extensively for internal, like it was almost all of it. But then almost the same amount also had some external. So it's a mix overall, but I would say half really focused internally. There. And then you can see, I think the other interesting number is 69% work for clients more than once. And so then related to that, finding clients that want to work directly with the students, that want to give the students the power to make decisions and have a seat at the big table. Find clients that will invest the time needed to work with the students with design-driven projects. And I think in my own experience, this has been the big challenge, is finding that right balance. How do you communicate that? And I think that's an ongoing iterative process, is adjusting that and figuring out what is a good match. Another piece of advice, never take on a project that you couldn't do yourself. Things go sideways, you have no experience in the type of project you have agreed to take on, you in the studio will fail. And so this is something I've experienced as well, where the student team started to implode for various reasons. And so what does failure look like? Do we let that fail? Like, I mean, is it okay? What's the responsibility there, and how is that communicated with the client and the students? How do you I'm jumping ahead to my questions before, how do you handle mistakes and there? So then we have other guests here as well. So we just wanted to invite our three guests that we specifically reached out to through the research, to just give a little introduction about their studio and what they do.
You're muted, Jeff.
Oh.
For some reason, the space bar wasn't working. Yeah, so this is me. So I took over the Four Design Studio from Meaghan. Meaghan ran Four Design from 2011 to 2014. I came in 2014. We have a studio space with room for 11 students. You know, I think, like probably most of you, we are all virtual right now. We have 13 students working this semester. We currently have 9 projects happening simultaneously. We do work for rate. We do have an hourly rate that we charge. I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that later. Students can take it for credit, as Meaghan mentioned, internship credit, or as a field study elective. And we work on probably 75% of our clients are on-campus clients, and 25% come from the community.
And we'd also like.
Hi. Oh, sorry, Meaghan. I was going to introduce myself right away. Should I go ahead?
Yes, I was just nudging you, but you were on top of it.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Gaby Hernández. I am an assistant professor of graphic design at the University of Florida. Here representing the Mint Design Studio, which is a part studio, part class in the School of Art and Art History of the University of Florida. It is a very exciting moment for Mint because it is close to celebrate 20 years of existence. So that has been a very exciting thing to see. Right there in the picture, you see the lady in the second row on black, that is Maria Rogal, who was the founder of Mint, which has been really a life changer for our students. Right now, the way that it works is, or it has been working for the last 19 years, it has been as an elective that students apply to every semester. And lately, in the last, let's say, 5 years, we have been trying to integrate collaborators and partnerships or partners from mostly from the community, many times from the university. We have worked with the local government. And because this is a class, and because we really try to lead the students all the way through, I particularly, the way that I teach it is I introduced during the beginning, I introduced a series of methods and techniques they practice that a little bit, and then a project is introduced. Because of my perspective and my approach, there is a design research component in those dynamics. So the clients that we look for example, are those that are interested in getting that kind of experience with the students as well. So yeah, it's been a good time seeing how much students get out of that. It's amazing for their portfolios, for their CVs, because of the kinds of methods and techniques that they learn. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what we are doing here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alison Popp at Ferris State University. I should introduce Ferris first because many of you probably have never heard of Ferris State University, situated in the middle of the hand of Michigan. We're north of Grand Rapids, about 50 miles north of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And our program is uniquely situated in the College of Business, and we have been since about 1990. And about 1995, the professors who have now retired established what we call the Design Project Center. Our URL is Fresh Minds Think Design, which we neglected that website for a while. It's, that's one of the things we have on our to-do list, is to update the work there. But Fresh Minds Think Design is sort of a tagline that we like to think that we have these students here in the College of Business studying design, and our senior year is really made up of the Design Project Center experience. I would consider it a capstone. They have a portfolio class and they have an entrepreneurship type class, but their senior year, it's a 9-credit experience. Right now we have 3 faculty members teaching the Design Project Center, 1 semester in the fall, 9 credits in the spring. So it's a lot of Design Project Center experience. That's how much we believe in this experience. So when it was established in 1995, it just kept building and building and building. And about 10 years ago, I got involved, and so we take on clients that we've had Ferris or on-campus clients. We've had retail clients over the years. I pulled a tally together just because I was digging around some files, and it's less than half on-campus clients, which I was surprised. I thought we were doing a lot of Ferris stuff here, but we've learned over the years. We make adjustments. Our students each student will have 2 clients to work on. Something that a student will have a new project or a new client, something that's new to the design center. It's maybe a new branding system and a website or something like that, some kind of a brand system. And the second client would be what we call a legacy project. So the students are kind of getting this experience that they get to work on something that isn't just handed off to them. They get to do the kickoff client meeting and establish the goals with the client and prepare a proposal in the scope of work. And then, but the legacy client work is maintaining something that was established a couple years ago in the design center. So we hang on to clients for about 3 years. We do charge a fee, just operating costs. We invoice them and have a client contract prior to the students getting involved, and the students run everything else. And we serve as art directors, advisors, managers, facilitators when they need it, but we try to give them as much autonomy as they can handle. Now, if the students aren't demonstrating a lot of skill in certain areas, we really have to step in. So it's a heck of a lot of work on our end, but employers tell us all the time that it's the differentiator for our students, because they say the phrase, they hit the ground running really, really well coming out of our program. So we believe in it. It's a heck of a lot of work, and we have pains every year. There's something that comes up that we need to adjust for next year. So, that's us. We're the Design Project Center, and that's one of our dedicated studio spaces in this image. Some students are working, and they have building access to our College of Business building with their key card, special access, so that they can work, outside of designated class times as needed. So I have other notes, but I'm sure they're more related to some of the questions that are coming up.
Well, thank you all for giving a brief introduction to your studios. And what I'll do now is just kind of run through some of the questions we got in advance. But if there's anything that people want to come back to, just type it in the chat, or we can pull these back up if there aren't questions from those of you that are here today. But a lot of the questions we saw were about this how. How do you handle students using software with educational licenses for profit assignments? And how many students per supervisor is too many? How do you get the word out to the community about your studio? And how does your work count toward your scholarship? Is this research? Is this service? Is this teaching? We also got a lot of do you work year round? And do you know of anyone working in the K through 12 space running these sorts of studios? Do you use contracts or mutual letters of agreement with clients? And within that, how do you handle copyright issues? Do you have structures in place for project cancellations? And this question, well, I liked, so I made it big since I laid out the slides. But as design educators or creative art director, and I just moved you all, and now I am on, oops, that's the end. Sorry, yay Zoom. As design educators teaching or creative art directing projects, how can we discuss equity-centered design and racial justice to build humility and empathy? And what is the function of design in a larger context? So the other questions Jessica and I sort of had, so quite a lot of questions, hence why we wanted to bring you all together, is really what Jessica mentioned earlier about what's the role of the faculty? How hands are you? Is this art director or instructor, or as Alison said, facilitator? And how much freedom are you giving students within that? What's your primary goal of your studio? And how do you handle mistakes? And do you let these projects fail? So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to give a pre-thanks because we are so glad to have you all together. And I know Jessica and I have a lot of questions as well. So we will get to the Q&A. So is there anything, and feel free to use the raise hand feature or type in the chat that came to mind that people wanted answered, or you could just ask. Well, I see in the chat, how do you graciously decline ill-fitting requests from university boards of trustees? Purely hypothetical example, we assume.
Well, I can start if that's okay. Not that I know of, our board of trustees has never reached us for that, but we have had requests that are probably not the best fitting, right? The thing about the way we do it here, at least during the time that I was directing or leading it, which was from 2017 to 2019, maybe 2.5 years or so, because we try to rotate. So right now it's another professor who is, directing it. But during the time that I was directing it, I had a list of people who have reached me, who have come to meet with me to give me like a sense of the kind of project that they want. And I just try to be very, very honest with people. I think that knowing exactly what the mission of the studio or the practice is, it really, really helps. Because, sometimes someone will come, oh, I need to do, to get a logo and a new menu, right? And we don't do those kinds of things, right? Our approach is this. So just being very straightforward, very honest with people. When we have been very lucky to have, as I said before, a waiting list of projects, because the way that we work in Mint is a class-based, semester-based. So there are specific things that we cannot really do in the time frame. So I think that just keeping it very real and understanding really well the amount of students that we have and how much of the work they can do on their own or they need supervision. So after a while, one gets a better idea of how to handle the tasks. So yeah, that's my experience.
I have some experience to share. When we feel uncomfortable with the request, we don't have to advertise our services. Word gets out that there's this team of designers. This area is starving for some design service, and when we noticed that we're working on something that should be going to a paid professional, we put the brakes on it, right? We don't want to devalue the work in any way. What I started doing is collecting a list of alumni who work at, or alumni owned studios, or alumni who are freelancers that I know, and I send that back, and that sort of stops that back and forth, because I say, oh, this looks like something that is good for a paid professional, right? And so I want to make sure I'm not taking work away. And we also suggest, if it is an on-campus client, it's not marketing the programs. We did that once in a while. It's not advertising the university in any way. Our students are paying tuition for this course, so we want to make sure we're very ethical in what we're taking on. It's not for the university, but it might be a social benefit, a campaign or a program of social benefit. So social benefit, and isn't taking work away from what should be going to paid professionals, is sort of our standard. And when we state it that way, just like you're saying, Gabby, we're very honest and also protective of our industry.
Just to offer a different perspective on that, Alison, I just want to clarify, you're not charging clients for the work that you do, is that correct?
Right. We are charging fees for operating costs.
Okay. So to offer the different perspective on that, the studio that I'm in charge of, we do charge clients, and we are directly in competition with local firms to create that work, for better or for worse. Sometimes, I think that the slide that was in the presentation about, working with clients who want to work with students, that is the ideal client, no matter what. But sometimes when you get clients coming in, for us, since we are for-profit and hopefully self-sustaining, we want to be sure that the clients are getting both what they pay for with the professional level, quality of work that will compete with local firms. So they will continue to come back to us or refer other people to us. But at the same time, we can't overprice ourselves, because there are always, designers in the area who will work for cheaper than we are. That's a whole other issue to try to figure out.
And I see Victor's had his hand up.
Hi, I was just wondering, a lot of you guys are mentioning that you come from the design school and the graphic design classes and things like that. And at least in UCF, we have the graphic design is in the School of Visual Art and Design, and then the ad PR, for instance, is in the School of Communications across the street. I'm just wondering if there's any collaboration between any of the departments in different schools, and if so, how do you handle that red tape? How do you handle the teaching kind of like responsibilities and that kind of thing?
Before you all answer, I just want to say, I think that also connects to a question in the chat about if there's another program that has a similar thing, and maybe there's a competition issue as well.
I can definitely speak to that. So within our College of Business, we have an organization called PRISM, which is a student-run. Their goal is more social media marketing. So they're marketing and advertising focused, and we are more design and branding focused. That being said, we do have some overlap. We do take on advertising and marketing projects every now and then. And then they also, the students that are in PRISM sometimes are also some graphic design students. And so some of the work they do does get more into branding and design. So there's some gray fuzzy area there that I guess it could be considered competition. But luckily, I think we have enough students working and interested in these two areas that we can afford to have some overlap.
And Prescott, I know you've had your hand raised. It feels like a teacher to call on people, so please also feel free to just ask your questions.
No, it's okay. It's I mean, it's Zoom. That's how we roll. And actually, some of my students are here on the call. So thank you for having me, everyone. I have a question. I apologize, we came in a little bit late about, it seems like some of you have, your agency is not only a group of students, but it's also a place, and you sort of have facility just for that purpose. So first of all, I'm envious, but also like, how is that viewed sort of within the rest of your school? I mean, is that the sort of project that the administration and other majors are supporting and kind of admiring, or is it quite literally a turf war where an empty room just for 8 students, becomes a sort of cultural issue? So I'm just curious to hear about the physicality of it.
Anyone else want to start? I can say, so we have a dedicated studio for the class that is solely ours, but we also have a conference room that we will allow other people to use us, in normal times. As long as we don't have client meetings scheduled in there, other faculty can schedule time in there if they need to have meetings or whatever. So that we do open that up, and that seems to doesn't seem to be a turf war here. I know that space is always an issue, no matter where you guys are, where we are, but so far it hasn't been an issue yet.
Well, also just to add, for Virginia Tech, they got their space initially from a large client. So I believe it was something like a $100,000 or $200,000 grant that didn't all just come to our student studio, but it was this large grant-based project on campus that enabled us to get funding and sort of a justification for a conference room, computer lab, even just buying the furniture, that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
then since then, it's been more maintenance, which is a lot easier than starting up.
And
So
I
I need to start doing some work for the office of the university architect on our campus, who is responsible for all those 25-year projects,
I know Alison has some things to say, but I will say, Prescott, that on the survey, I don't know if you heard that we did a survey that went out to faculty who advise these. And when we said, like, what is the one thing you wish you had, or what do you want in the future? And at least half said our own dedicated space, so that students could kind of move in and out and more simulate that environment of a studio. So Alison, I think you were about to speak.
So we had this space dedicated for many, many years. It's been a long time that we've had a classroom environment, no windows, and in a good conference room. We just invested in a new display for presenting to clients. So it's a great functional space, but it's not very, it doesn't really contribute to a good culture. So that is something new that we've been thinking about, is now that we have proven that we can do some remote work and do satellite work, we're doing more things in a more urban environment down in Grand Rapids, and trying to capture spaces down there to meet with clients. We've had a lot of design firms and tech companies dedicate their spaces to us so that we could do ad hoc meetings and client meetings there. And that got us on this mindset that we'd like to do something that's more of a mobile studio, and even considered giving up our space that's been dedicated for years so that we can invest in creating more mobile environments and just mobile technologies for presenting work. So that's actually something we might try to move away from, is sitting in this space, but having a more dynamic and more distributed culture, I guess.
Well, we have another question that is, where do the projects come from? So are you, as the faculty, drumming up work behind the scenes, or is the whole department sending leads?
I can speak on that. At least for Mint, we do some reach out. We do talk to people that we find to be interesting and people we want to collaborate with. I'm talking about nonprofit organizations, some initiatives that we learn about from the local government, some special projects of the university, for example. So yeah, we do some reach out. We obviously vet and meet with the potential collaborators, and you know, it happens sometimes very naturally. We go to events and we meet people. We attend an opening and we meet people, right? So at least I try to be very direct when I know about someone having a need that may fit the kind of work that we do in the studio. Sometimes people just, you know, come to us recommended by, you know, other people, maybe other organizations that they know that have worked with us in the past. So we really try to, you know, keep it very varied, but there is nothing really wrong about taking on specific projects as well. For example, here we have had a very strong focus recently in the last couple of years on issues in equity. So equity is one of those things that we really want to approach through in different ways and in different courses. So MINT being a course, basically, we really want to bring in collaborators that you know, work with either minorities or students or immigrant, you know, so you name it. We really want to bring in those topics through different, in different ways. So yeah, we do outreach, we do planning.
Well, and I know Jessica and I too were talking about how we like this student space and that hands-on learning as almost in addition to a lot of the collaboration research that we've seen. You know, there's collaboration in design education and intercultural collaboration by design, those books that have come out pretty recently. And so yeah, I have a mess, so I don't know if I'll dive into it to try to find the book. But so really thinking about the intent of the studio. So thanks for bringing that up, Gaby.
Right. I think that, you know, I've seen it in many different ways, right? There are studios that are interested in students developing more of the technical skills, you know, some others more of an advertising marketing sort of approach, as was mentioned before. For us is a lot about putting the students in situations that would really mimic the real world when it comes to planning, to meeting, to researching, at least for me, it's hugely important for students to be exposed to. And that is why, you know, part of the pre-project training consists on presenting some techniques or methods that the students can, you know, become aware and practice so that they can, you know, acquire some terminology, acquire some you know, hands-on kind of experience before going to work with the collaborators out there. So that is the focus that we have, but you know, it really depends on the university and the program, and yeah, each university's focus, I guess.
Okay. So what seemed to be perhaps an easier question. Oh, Victor has his hand up again, but I was just going to say, how do your universities consider this as part of your job load? Is it part of your job description? Do you get a course release? Do you get a paid bonus? That sort of thing.
I can start, I guess. I am teaching this as a, it is part of my requirement. I'm technically a professor of practice. So this is part of the reason I was brought in to get clients for the university, to get students that industry experience working with those clients. But I have a 2-3 teaching load where For Design is one of those courses every semester. So in this fall, it's For Design plus one other course. And then in the spring, it's For Design plus 2 other courses, all in graphic design.
We have a heavy load at Ferris. I have 3 other courses I teach, so 4 over 4.
Victor, what was your question?
Several of you have mentioned that part of the experience is to give the students a little bit more of that experience of the actual workload. And I'm wondering, how much of a formal business, this is like a two-part question. How much of a formal business do you approach this? Did you initially have to like present a business plan to the dean to get approval? And then once you're in it, do you assign roles to your students? Like, do you have a student creative director and a student something else? And how do you find those students? How do you, is that portfolio based or some other way?
Well, Victor, I can share that, well, before getting students in the studio, we do a vetting process, right? They need to submit their portfolios, their interests. There is a whole form. We review it and select 10 to 12 students usually, so that we can work with 1 or 2 projects at a time. At least that's how I've been managing it. I know that my colleagues are doing it somewhat differently, but basically it's very similar. And I am the kind of professor who believes in giving students power of decision. So for example, if there is a group of students in Mint who are super interested in one of the projects available, so they get together and I give them guidance on how to assign roles amongst them. So they need to have sort of they need to be really engaged with each other, knowing that if one of them succeeds, all of the rest of the group is going to succeed. So it happens very naturally, right? They start being each other, accountable for the project without having to be, like slacking or anything like that. That happens very often. I think the key here is knowing really well how much time things may last, right? Because if you see that things are going to be taking over longer, either students need to either be very engaged with the project and continue on even if they graduate. It's happening to me right now. We're still working on a project after a year, and I still have students who graduated who are still providing assets for it, right? So I think that it has to do with a lot of the interest of the students. If this is a project that they really believe in, many times, if not always, they become very attached to it, right? So I think that in general, that's how it happens, right? It's just really important to be able to understand very well the process and knowing that each one of them is going to get something really positive out of that. And I believe in them being the ones telling me how they're going to work.
To back up part of that, I do run our studio as, we have a group of projects that we start off the semester with. And basically we talk about the projects, talk about student strengths, what their interests are, what their passions are, and let them self-select which project teams they want to be a part of. But then Gabby, to back up something else you said about, projects that look like they're going to take too long. We do have, and I'm sure you guys do too, we have it written into our contracts that if a project, takes more than, 3 rounds of, if we're still, nowhere close to the finish after 3 rounds of, basic concept presentations, we have to reassess the time because we can only dedicate so much time to projects. But that's always been written into our contracts, and that's something that's really valuable for students who want to freelance for other clients. It's like, how do I protect myself? How do I keep from being taken advantage of and seen as a student? Because I want them to take me seriously as a designer and someone who kind of knows the business, so they don't get taken advantage of. And being a part of helping to write those contracts and exposing the students to that is super helpful for them going out into the world.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I had a question. So this kind of ties into more the academia side of this. This is a practicum experience, and we're trying to get that real world experience within the class. Our role, whether it be advisor, art director, or instructor, how do you assess this? Because if this is a class 4 credit, it seems like there's a revolving, number of different kind of projects. Some individual projects students take on, some collaborative projects. What does the assessment look like for an experience like this?
Somebody else want to talk?
I could take it. So we have, our outcomes are actually quite limited when you think about all the things we do in this class. Our outcomes are really about the vendor interaction and the client interaction, and being able to meet industry standard, right? So, so as long as we, you know, I think what we try to do is document how are we doing in terms of what did the faculty members have to do to get them to that spot, or did they push those deadlines out because our students weren't there? We work really hard to make sure there isn't scope creep, and you know, but we you know, I think that we do assess based off of those outcomes, and oftentimes there's a lot of note taking I make in that. Boy, I had to do a lot of preliminary you know, introduction lectures and reminders about graphic design concepts and file formats, and things come up, you know, especially more recently, where, you know, it's a messy thing because, you know, my comments are, hey, we met these outcomes, but it took a lot of extra work on my end to get us there, you know, to make sure that we weren't delivering something that wasn't didn't meet an industry standard. So anyway, it's tricky, but we do track it, and I don't know if that helps answer your question. We try to meet those outcomes, but make a lot of notes and try to make adjustments in those prerequisites.
The way we do it here, or the way I try to do it, is mostly based on responsibility and participation. So not even if the students finish the project, because, you know, there are 1,000 reasons why a project cannot really be finished within the semester. But if the students were able to, you know, participate in all the activities, if they were able to keep a good attitude, if they were able to just have an open mind about how to go around a problem, that for me at least, that's enough. And those are usually the kind of soft skills that they really need to have in order to, you know, just be a good, you know, good sport in whatever they do. So that is mainly for me, participation and responsibility. I want to refer just really quickly to Kalina's question on the chat. She's asking what happens when the client doesn't like the student work, right? Yes, we get those. Of course that I'm going to be stepping in. I'm with the students during all the main meetings during the semester. And that's another thing that we try to do with the letter of agreement. I put in a basic timeline when the main meetings are going to happen. And I always ask the collaborators to be very, very precise on the things that they don't feel are working out. I don't get an I don't like it kind of response, because that's not really helpful at all. So I have guidelines for clients, or we call them collaborators, for collaborators and also for our students. One thing that helps enormously is that students do research and process presentations. So the clients are with us throughout the process, right? They are with us providing resources for research. They are there in our studio. Well, when we used to be face-to-face, but now it's online. They are with us when they're, you know, presenting research findings, when they have questions. So that is why the vetting process is so important, because we really want to have some sort of access to them as much as needed. So that's how we do it, Kalina.
Yeah, and for us, sorry. Someone else want to talk. Yeah, for us to talk about, you know, the students take initiative. Yeah, that's hugely, hugely important. If students can demonstrate that they have, if they're one of those introverted students that is not willing to speak up in client meetings, by the end of the semester, 9 times out of 10, those students have grown and developed those skills. But then regarding the client work question, and, you know, if clients are not happy with the work, for us, that has rarely happened. I like to think it's because we really involve the client at every possible moment. So we don't just provide them with one direction, say, here you go, this is our work. we give them choices. We say, here's our first round of concepts. We present, 5 to 7 options for logo concepts, and we talk about it and what's working, what's not working. And so we move forward through the process so that we don't get to the end and have a project that the client has never seen before, and they have to say, well, we like it, even though they don't. By the end, they've been so involved through the process, through all the iterations, that the client feels just as much ownership in the project as the students do, and everyone is happy. That being said, we have had clients that, for some reason, when a project is almost finished, completely change their mind, and say, this is not, I showed this to my boss, my director, my wife, whatever, and she brought up a good point that she felt like this is not working. And so we have to say, well, we've spent this many hours, we agreed to this many hours, we're almost finished with the project. We have to bill you for what we've done so far, even if you say we don't want to move forward with this. And so that contract really comes in handy in those moments.
Well, and I think what so many of you are getting at is that dance that you have to be, you're the go-between between clients and your students. And so making sure that your students are delivering, but also that the clients are articulating. I just finished the You're My Favorite Client book, and talking about how you need to encourage sometimes a client to give you that negative feedback as well. But I think that for me, the tone was always empower and encourage students, but that doesn't mean you can't critique them. All right, John, I know you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes. This is like out of place now, but it's back to the question about how students interact with each other and assigning roles. And somebody had brought up Kent State in the chat, and I'm an alumnus from Kent State. I was a student designer in Glyphics. I was also a student manager, and that was started in the early 70s. So by the time I got there, everything was very well established. And that role, the way everything was set up right off the bat, was sometimes more rigorous than an actual studio. When I went on to internships, I already knew about production meetings and job jackets and all these different things, all these different structures that I hadn't quite gotten in class, was part of our daily life there. And as an undergrad, the manager of the studio was a graduate student. And so we had a mix of undergraduate and graduates. And the sporadic attempts I've made at this at Sacramento State, I've tried to employ that same structure where the senior students are mentoring the junior students, and that they build that structure of leadership, that mentorship, and it really creates a more cohesive group within that space when everyone understands their role. And is able to see where they can grow into that role. Because I eventually became a manager of the studio as a grad student, and I could see those examples and grow into that. So it allows them to grow into those skills if they aspire to do so.
We also wanted to say that if anyone who's not a panelist, there's a lot of experts in this audience, so feel free to jump in at any point. I'd say the mentoring thing is huge, and if you can do that well, that will save you so much effort. But also grad students can play a nice role. So since Poor Design does charge, when we have a good year, we're able to sometimes do things like pay our students or pay a graduate student. And that can also be helpful in managing some of those day-to-day kinds of activities. But I've also seen a lot of studio models where they will have that creative director role assigned either on a project basis or even for a semester. I know our sister, I guess I'll call it a sister, it's like our stepsister, Prism, the marketing group, they really are very much about those art director roles, and they pay the people who've been working for several years, whereas the entry-level people are sort of in that learning phase of it.
One thing that's helped us when we've been able to do it is, even if everyone else has, the role of just being a designer or lead designer on a project, having a project manager, someone who is also dedicated to project management, to help me, to keep things on track, and also to act as a liaison with the students, someone who, one of their peers, is really, really helpful. And so whenever we have people who interview that do have that skill set, I try to put them in that role. We've got a really, really good one this semester.
Rebecca?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm on my phone, so hopefully you can hear me okay. So one thing this is kind of a three-part question, but I'm curious about student compensation and if they're taking this for course credit or even internship credit. I'm curious to hear how everyone addresses compensating the student aside from their experiential practice.
It's 9 credits at Ferris. Actually, I should say 18.
Wait, like at once? Sorry.
No, 9 credits. We're not very creative in our faculty workloads here, so it's a 9 credit experience in the fall and a 9 credit experience in the spring semester. So it's a lot of dedicated time.
Nice.
We don't do contact hours. It's credit hours in our university, in our college.
In our case, it's a 3-credit class that students can repeat. So up to 6 credits.
Same for us, but there's no limit. We've had a few students do it 3 semesters, but 3 hour every semester.
Yeah, and also just to note, Gabby had suggested this earlier and someone else brought it up. We're planning on having a Student Run Design Studios channel in our Slack group as well. So we'll put a link to the general Slack channel and I'll go ahead and create that. I think since it's been in existence, we might have to do some tweaking on the design educators community side to make sure, but this is a boring detail. But basically, stay tuned for a follow-up on having a continued Slack channel conversation.
There's a
And
question
Meaghan,
I've been asked a couple of times that we might want to get to before. Is that what you were going to say?
yeah, I was gonna say, Jeff, can one of you all jump in on that question that Masha reintroduced? That'd be great.
Yeah, so the question is, some of the design studios mentioned taking on internal work. Can you talk more about that? Are you doing design work for departments, for the school? And I will say yes, about 75% of the work we do is for different departments and programs across the university. We have a large university with lots of variety within the departments that we do work with. And a lot of the stuff that we do is not necessarily branded with the university's brand standards. A lot of it is kind of autonomous, which is really nice. We do have a brand system that we do need to work within on some clients, which is nice for students to get that experience. But at the same time, a lot of clients on campus do come to us needing something completely unique. And so with that, it's just like working with any client who comes to you and needs a brand, you know, that you get to take it from start to finish and make it something completely unique within the university.
Our application process means that if it's a Ferris, if it's an on-campus client or internal, we require that it is a social campaign and it's internal. It doesn't need to meet Ferris or university graphic standards. And if it's a technology, if it's a website, it can't be hosted using the university standard, because we found through our industry research that the tools and content management systems that our university might use isn't necessarily a university standard. And our goal is to prepare students for their jobs. So we are just very upfront and say, well, if it has anything to do with a university standard, we probably can't take it on. It'll have to be a standalone or hosted elsewhere, and we'll guide them through that process. A separate URL, separate server.
So we're just about at an hour, and I think if there's anyone that didn't get their questions answered, I know I'm not always good at multitasking. So if I missed anything and you really want to ask, please post again. But I've shared my contact information and the Slack channel. We can plop a couple more of the design educators community ways of connecting in there as well. But we hope we can continue this conversation. And I am so thankful to our panelists for being here, and for all of you. This was a phenomenal conversation. So thanks.
We need more than an hour.
There's no hard cutoff either. So if there's anyone that didn't get their question answered, let us know.
Can I ask a question for those that are still hanging around? Actually, I have a different question, but Archana, I'm going to go to you. You have your hand up.
Yeah, hi everyone. This was great discussion. I was just wanting to share that at Illinois State University, we have an organization, an in-house studio called Design Streak Studio, and we are celebrating our 40th anniversary this fall. So there's a lot of history here, and I've been teaching that course for the past 6 years now. My question is, I've been working with our provost office to recognize this type of teaching as scholarship. Because we do, like, there's a lot of creative direction that happens because a faculty becomes a creative director, art director, faculty, and whatnot. We take up so many different roles. So I've been working with the provost office so that this kind of teaching will be recognized as scholarship and not just like, just teaching.
Well,
how is it done within your universities? How is it recognized?
That's a good question.
Well, I was going to say, so Jeff's actually not a tenure track position. He's a soon to be associate professor of professional practice. And so that's a very specific, how universities keep making up new titles. But so his expectations are actually to maintain the practice of the student run design studio. So for his, it's tied to his job position. My workaround advice would almost be to produce more traditional research that reflects the work that you're doing. For instance, like maybe you'll talk to Jessica and I, and we could interview you and make this a more formal thing. And then you could put that on your CV. But those sorts of things of, if you can weave these things in, so your teaching efforts and your research efforts support one another would be my advice, just knowing the research one, you can't always change the rules of the game.
Right, I was going to refer to that exactly, not with such nice words, but yeah, basically, whatever you can get out of the experience of teaching this class, and if it is peer reviewed, I think that should be okay. At least it is for us. In my case, I am a tenure track and professor, and you know how it is. You find ways to do something innovative with everything and just try to put it out there in the world. So, but yeah, for me, it's part of my load of teaching when I've taught the class and when I was heading it. So, but whatever new experiments or new techniques or new ideas that I'm able to create and develop with my students, that is something I can write about or, present about. So.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I mean, I've been doing the same. I've been presenting my work, my teaching and scholarship at various conferences. And then also like the work that we have done, it's very, I focus a lot about how do we talk about equity, and then how do we talk about social justice, and then we do a lot of community work for the local community, and our projects are kind of like, we do have an area called Civic Engagement Center. So our studio got a big splash about like in their magazine, and so everybody talks about it in the community. So we are pretty popular because our studio has almost become like the studio in our community. So that's kind of nice. But then in terms of work, we do a lot of collaborative work with local agencies, non-for-profit agencies. So that's when there's a lot of recognition. The newspaper talks about our studio and things like that. And then we have also done work outside of Illinois as well. So there comes the recognition. But then it's just that the whole idea of change, right? Like how do we kind of address that? So it's not seen as commercial, right? So we are a part of, I'm a associate professor, and I'm slowly in another year or so, I'm planning to apply for full professor as well. So that's why I've been engaging. So we are kind of introducing this word called integrated. So like, how do you integrate teaching and scholarship? So we are introducing that word in our ASPT document. So when something, because you can't double dip, right? So then how, when something like, it becomes, when it feels like you're double dipping, so how do we kind of write that in our dossier? So that kind of language we are developing, because sometimes you're doing service as well. When you go meet with these collaborators, you're going out and then you're meeting with them, and right, as faculty. So you're not just only teaching, but then you're also doing service. So how do we, when there's all this overlap, so how do we kind of write that in our dossier?
Phenomenal question. I would also say one thing that showed up at Virginia Tech's dossier format the past year or two was a section on diversity and inclusion. And so I don't know that it counts points wise for promotion and things like that, but it's at least shown up in an official capacity on the documents that we have to submit. So I think that's a place that if your university or institution is not currently valuing that, I think you can advocate for that, especially if you're an associate professor, or as we start to get on the other side of some of these thresholds, if we can be the change makers or push for some of this change. But I support everything. I'm not sure I can do much to change it at your institution, but if there's anything we can do to help, let us know too.
Thank you, Meaghan. I mean, our institution, we do have a DEI committee within our school, and I currently chair that committee as well. And then we are also representing, like I represent on the President's Advisory Council for our president as well for our university. So, I mean, there is a lot of talk going on, right? So thank goodness it's not a trend, right? Because DEI has become a trend right now. So hopefully it's not, but this kind of language is being addressed. And I'm kind of working on like, how do we put that in our document, right? So then for future, because no one's permanent, right? And then so how can other faculty members who are doing something similar be recognized? Because when it comes to civic engagement, not many faculty want to do it because how do you write that in scholarship, right? And not consider that as service. So we are kind of coming up with new language to address civic engagement as well as DEI.
Yeah, and I would say, this is also the kind of thing, like Meaghan, you said, being a change agent. This is where when we collaborate on this, like we share the language that we are all developing. So Arch and I like your, integrated thing. It makes me think it's all about the argument, right? And so if the argument, like to become a full professor means that you have achieved this level and you have contributed to this kind of knowledge in the field, the argument then becomes civic engagement, DEI, et cetera, combined with all of this is contributing to knowledge in the field in this way. So I think it's like taking the language of the industry, which I'll call it an industry, that's what it is, and let's figure out how to work with it and make that argument. And the more people we share that idea with, that then are sitting on those committees that are going to review it, because that's also the issue. We can talk about it all day long, but then if someone from a very different, much more, a discipline with a very different paradigm, it's going to be hard. So I think the more we keep it open, let's start a Slack channel for like tenure arguments and full professor arguments.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that would be wonderful.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, like for us, the whole argument was we are housed in the School of Art. We are not the School of Art and Design. So how do we kind of navigate and really push our argument? Because we have to be our own advocates.
I think that having a Slack channel, speaking of Slack channels, that's another one, right? We really need to have that because our channel is kind of like describing a lot of, do you have like special senses where you get to understand what other people are going through? Because it's very descriptive to our situation, right? We just like literally today, we got the new tenure and promotion guidelines for design approved by the school because we're in a School of Art, just probably like you. So there is a lot of cultural change that needs to happen. Absolutely, especially when it comes to those issues of diversity, equity, justice. Yeah, we need to talk more amongst us for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to collaborate and I would love to talk more too. And I'm sorry, I don't have my video on. I just finished cooking and whatnot. So the realities of life.
No worries. And yesterday was the first time I think I'd had my video off with my students because I was literally dirty because I had repotted plants and I had dirt on me. And I was like, you know, I'm going to call it today. And just it's a small group. So did we have any other questions before we sort of wrap it up and continue the conversation online? And again, we can share our contact information as well. Well, let me thank everyone once again. And I was recording this, so we'll kind of work through the kinks and then share this on our YouTube channel. And we'll also share information about that Slack channel. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the panelists.
Yes, thank you.
So good to see you all.